All right, let's dive right into this. Today, we are going to methodically break down the blueprints, the claims, and the controversies surrounding a potential second term for Donald Trump. And look, we have a mountain of insights to get through from former administration officials, campaign critics, and diehard loyalists, but we are going to put all the outside noise aside. We're looking strictly at the source material today, clinically examining exactly what a second term could actually look like, based entirely on what both his supporters and his detractors are saying. So here's our roadmap for today. First, the overarching second-term vision. Second, dismantling the deep state. Third, reshaping foreign alliances. Fourth, the border and deportations. And finally, number 5, justice and democracy. Okay, starting off with Section 1, the second-term vision and planning for day one. To really understand this, we've got to establish a baseline, and that means talking about Project 2025. Basically, this is a massive 920-page playbook. It was engineered by a coalition of over 107 conservative organizations and spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation. Its stated goal? To help a conservative president govern on day one and, crucially, to deconstruct the administrative state. Now, it is absolutely important to note here that the Trump campaign has actually publicly distanced itself from this project. But the initiative is still heavily staffed by former Trump administration officials, like Paul Dance, for example, who see this as the ultimate way to unite the conservative movement against what they view as elite left-wing rule. So we're not just talking about standard transition planning here, it's a fundamental reimagining of how the government that serves you operates on a daily basis. 10,000. I mean, just wrap your head around that scale for a second. That's the size of a small town. Project 2025 is actively vetting a database of over 10,000 aligned conservatives from all walks of life. The whole goal is to have this veritable army of trained, vetted individuals ready to step right into government roles immediately. And they aren't just looking for your typical everyday bureaucrats. No, they're looking for individuals who have literally given blood for the movement and are unapologetically aligned with the agenda. Moving right along to Section 2, dismantling the deep state and reforming the bureaucracy. So the actual mechanical tool proposed to achieve this government deconstruction is known as Schedule F. This is a proposed executive order that would effectively allow the president to reclassify tens of thousands of career civil servants who sit in policymaking roles. And the catch? Once they're reclassified, they lose their traditional employment protections and can just be fired at will. Now, to understand why this is even being proposed, you have to listen to the philosophy behind it. The goal is having the boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will. Supporters and former officials like Chad Wolf argue that unelected bureaucrats actively sabotage the administration from the inside during that first term. Our sources detail how officials, like the anonymous author Miles Taylor, worked from within to actively frustrate the president's agenda. So for loyalists, the logic is simple. If a president is elected by millions of Americans, the bureaucracy has to carry out those orders. Breaking the resistance of these career officials isn't seen as dangerous. To them, it's seen as absolutely essential for true democracy. But flipping that perspective, we have a stark warning from critics. Former DOJ attorney Erica Newland argues that tools like Schedule F won't just remove obstructionists. She warns it's going to create a dystopian army of unswerving loyalists. Critics say the vetting questions for these new hires act like dog whistles, basically ensuring that only sycophants who will enable a president's worst impulses are brought into power. They fear it'll leave us with a government run entirely by grifters. All right, Section 3 takes us overseas, reshaping foreign alliances and putting America first on the global stage. And this brings up a massive question that is currently echoing around the entire globe. Will the U.S. actually protect its NATO allies? As you can see, there is a massive, stark divide here. Donald Trump has flat out stated he would not protect delinquent NATO nations who don't pay their bills, famously even saying he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want. His supporters view this as a totally necessary, pragmatic, and transactional approach. They want to force allies to pay their fair share and stop draining American treasure. But on the exact opposite side, former intelligence chiefs like Leon Panetta call this a catastrophic vulnerability. They are sounding the alarm, warning that treating these historic alliances purely as financial transactions actively invites aggression from adversaries like Vladimir Putin. Furthermore, we see this really intense debate over his stance on autocrats. Critics warn he is seduced by strongmen, pointing to his own quip about wanting to be a dictator on day one. But supporters push back really hard on this narrative. Ambassador Gordon Sondland recalls that behind closed doors, Trump's public persona completely drops. Sondland actually shared an anecdote where Trump, privately speaking about Kim Jong-un, bluntly acknowledged that the North Korean leader would gladly kill him if given half the chance. So, to his supporters, this proves Trump is deeply sober and acutely aware of the deadly threat these foreign leaders pose, and they argue he's just using his public rhetoric as a strategic show. Which brings us to Section 4, the border and deportations, and a promise of mass removals. 15 to 16 million. That estimated number of undocumented individuals targeted by the proposed administration is just staggering. The explicit promise here is to enact the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. Once again, we have a total fracture in how people view this. Supporters like Chad Wolf defend these mass deportations as an absolutely vital response to the fentanyl crisis and public safety threats. They argue that removing individuals without legal rights is just basic standard law enforcement. Critics, however, are utterly horrified by the rhetoric accompanying this policy. When the former president speaks of migrants poisoning the blood of the nation, lawmakers like Zoe Lofgren call the language Hitleresque. They warn that a deportation operation of this unimaginable scale would require a terrifying authoritarian domestic military presence. And finally, Section 5, justice, retribution, and democracy. This is our final and maybe most deeply polarized pillar. Let's look at how the two sides view the Department of Justice. Trump loyalists describe the DOJ as a corrupt viper's nest and a completely weaponized extension of the deep state that actively targets conservatives, arguing it has to be completely overhauled. Critics, on the other hand, view the DOJ as a sacred, independent pillar of democracy. They fear Trump is going to act on his repeated promises of retribution, specifically pointing to his vow to appoint a special prosecutor to target Joe Biden and other perceived political enemies. To put some framework around these fears, critics point to a very specific 7-step authoritarian playbook. They argue the former president has already engaged in these exact steps, from aggrandizing executive authority and politicizing independent institutions, right down to quashing dissent and stoking violence. For these critics, let's be clear, this isn't just a standard policy disagreement. It is an existential crisis, and they warn the Republic honestly might not survive his return to power. Yet, in completely stark contrast, loyalists view him as the ultimate patriot. Listen to how Paul Dans of Project 2025 describes this. He calls it building a city on the hill, seeing a second term as a beacon of democracy across the entire world. Supporters see Trump as an avatar for their own anger. He's the protector of the great American experiment, and frankly, the orange wrecking ball tasked with smashing institutions they feel have been systematically rigged against everyday Americans. To them, a second term isn't the end of democracy, it is the literal restoration of it. So, how on earth did we arrive at this incredibly polarized moment? Well, in just a few short years, we've gone from the constitutional crisis of the January 6th attack to current campaign promises of pardoning those convicted, people Trump refers to as hostages, right up to the recent Supreme Court ruling granting sweeping presidential immunity for official acts. It becomes incredibly clear when you lay it out like this that the traditional guardrails of the presidency are dramatically shifting right before our eyes. Ultimately, we are left with one massive defining question. Is it necessary to completely dismantle the establishment guardrails to save the system? Or is this proposed blueprint a fatal threat to the republic's survival? The answer to that question will likely be decided by you, the voter, and it's absolutely going to shape the future of the globe. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions, and I'll catch you next time.